Good afternoon. If you will please rise for the presentation of the colors by the Air Force ROTC Unit 821 of the Arlington Career Center. For the invocation, the Reverend Hugh Harris.
Let us pray. Almighty God, our strength and our hope, by whose grace we have been blessed these 40 years in the service and care of those who suffer, we offer you our prayers of thanksgiving for allowing Arlington Hospital to prosper and to grow into the institution that now stands as a symbol of your healing presence in our community. Bring comfort and healing to all who are sick, and be a companion to those who are alone. Bless our benefactors, living and departed, and all those who have worked over the years to promote good health care for all. Bless and guide our board of directors, the auxiliary, volunteers, and all others who give of themselves. Give skill, sympathy, and patience to our doctors and nurses, and encourage those who support their efforts. As we look to the future, we ask that you will guide us in accordance with your will and continue your gracious work among us to heal all manner of sickness and disease. For yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Amen.
I am Hank Lampe. I'm currently the president of the Board of Trustees of this hospital. And as such, I welcome you all here today. Thank you for coming. We'll see if we can't do it again in another 40 years. But the first 40 seem to have worked out pretty well. First time I came here this is my 30th anniversary. 30 years ago, I was a patient here for the first time. I was over in a B wing. Wasn't much of a place then, but it operated. I got operated on. I got out of here, and I'm still here today. So I guess I did a good job 30 years ago. No, none of that now. You want me back, huh? It's a pleasure to see you all here. And I'd like to introduce the current administrator of the hospital, Mr. John Sever, for a few cogent comments. John?
Thank you very much, Hank. I just want to say that being the administrator under the Board of Trustees and operating the hospital on their behalf, over the last 10 years, I've seen 1/4 of the history of the hospital. However, my biggest honor today is to introduce a distinguished guest that we have with us. And of course, there will be other very distinguished guests being introduced and will be speaking later on in the program. However, I want to say that there was no other single individual that had a greater impact on shaping the hospital than this individual during the years 1948 through 1974. You probably have seen him over the years. He was like a one-man dynamo involved in building programs, fundraising campaigns, and generally keeping the doors of the hospital open. His father was a Norwegian sailing ship captain who sailed the seas for 50 years. And this man himself left Jacksonville, Florida when he was 17 years old to go to sea. And I believe over a period of 4 years, he was shipwrecked at sea 2 different times. And he did return to land permanently after he met and married his wife, Mary. They then moved to the Washington metropolitan area, and John worked at the Old Children's Hospital, then received training in hospital administration at the University of Chicago, returned as administrator of Arlington Hospital. This was in, I believe it was November 1948. The finances were so bad at that time, he mentioned to me, that he had to pay the bread man every morning before he would leave the day's allotment of bread for the kitchen. Through his guidance, and of course many others, the hospital is now a successful 350-bed institution, and he retired in 1974 and has certainly left his imprint on this institution and organization. And he is here with us today with his wife Mary and his daughter Sandra. I'd like you to welcome Mr. John J. Anderson. thank you for being with us today, John. Just a few more awards. As I said earlier, I've been here 10 years. I did arrive shortly after the completion of the new hospital building in 1973, and have seen the move into that, as well as, of course, the new John T. Hazel Conference Center. Dr. Hazel is with us today. We'll be speaking later in the program. And, of course, the new medical office building and parking facility, which was just recently finished. Over the years, this organization, this hospital, the Arlington Hospital Association, has responded to the needs of the community as well as responding to national endeavors. The Medicare legislation in 1966 infused a lot of money into health care and into hospitals. Previous to that, Mr. Anderson spent many days, many evenings fundraising throughout the community to pay for the charity care being offered here at the hospital. Since then, of course, we've had the Hill Burton program, which was responsible for funding and building many hospitals across the country. And most recently, the general public is most concerned about the cost of health care and medical care. And of course, we will be doing our part and are doing our part. We expect in the future that care will be provided in the most economical way, but yet to provide the quality care that's necessary. You'll be hearing such terms as corporate reorganization. Of course, we have that here with the Arlington Hospital Foundation and an affiliated corporation, the Arlington Health Service Corporation. You'll be hearing also about vertical integration. Hospitals will become more than just four walls housing inpatient beds. We'll be involved in home health care, perhaps even in nursing home care and other types of care. And you'll be hearing about joint ventures with other hospitals and with physician groups and others, again to provide an arrangement whereby quality of care is provided in the most efficient way. But whatever, Arlington Hospital will be successful because of the quality of the people associated with the organization. First, the Board of Trustees, the medical staff, the hospital auxiliary, management, nursing of the hospital, and all the employees. So I thank you very much for the privilege of speaking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I had a big speech prepared, but then somebody got a hold of it and they printed it. So would you please all read the little booklet, and then I don't have to say anything more. Okay, Dr. Dolan, you asked me for a short speech. You got it. It's my pleasure to introduce a few special guests here today. First and foremost, as you know, we're 40 years, this is our 40th birthday. 40 years ago, we had a patient here, and the lady came, and the lady presented us with our firstborn in the hospital. And I'm very happy to see Mr. and Mrs. Stallings Sr. here today. Pleasure to have you. I think we have a posy for Mrs. Stallings, don't we not? Everybody gets a posy. Not to be outdone, that baby is here today too. And we're very happy to have our firstborn here. Now, he didn't pick up all his laundry when he left here, or maybe we didn't hand out laundry because those were the poor days and we couldn't. But nowadays, they all get a little T-shirt when they leave. It's so nice to know that your firstborn became a member of the cloth. Reverend Stallings today. We're very happy to have you come join us today. And I believe we have another posy. We handed out the posy for Mrs. Stallings. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. It's been a pleasure. I just met one of the newest ones, and I came in here in the lobby there was the latest arrival just departing, going home. And I said, we'll have a party for you 40 years from now, too. The other group that's having a birthday party today, and they're a little older than we are as a hospital, and those are the folks that started the idea of having a hospital. And they're now the hospital auxiliary. And this is our 40th, is their 50th birthday. And I'm very pleased to be able to visit with all the auxiliarians today on their birthday. I have a little extra connection with the auxiliary here. When I first came to Washington, metropolitan area, I was to attend college. And I spent a little time across the river, local institution in there. One of the folks that helped me out a lot in those days was then the dean of the college. There was a lady named Dr. Gondos. And Dr. Gondos is now Dr. Dorothy Gondos Beers, and she is a member of our auxiliary here. So it's really a small world. Things go in big circles, but we all come back together. And I was reminded of all this just the other day when I received a magazine from American University, and inside, in the almost center spread, there is Dorothy Gondos Beers' picture, a big article about what she did and what she's up to nowadays. And I'm very pleased to have her as a member of the auxiliary here. I would, in this connection, ask the current president of the Arlington Hospital Auxiliary, Ann Sharp, to come and give us a word.
Thank you, Hank.
Thank you, dear.
It really may seem a bit strange to be 10 years older than the hospital that you're serving, but this is just indeed fact. In recent weeks, I've been delving back into some old literature trying to get updated on some of the history of our auxiliary. And I was reading one yellowed page that went like this. Arlington County is in reality a city of 60,000 people. The article went on to say, it is one of the fastest growing communities in the United States. It has schools, it has a city form of government, and it even has modern sewers and a water system. But it has no hospital to call its own. In that year that the article was written, 1,275 babies were born to Arlington parents. But of that number, 1,182 had to go across the river to be born. Arlington doctors were having a very difficult time finding beds in Arlington to take their patients to. They went across the river, and they were astounded to find that they had to pay $12 a day for a room across the river. So indeed, a hospital in this community was needed for sure. And my reading has told me that the first movement toward a hospital for Arlington County had its beginning at a joint meeting of 5 federated women's clubs at the Ashton Heights Community Center in November of 1933. A year later came the formation of the Hospital Association with its governing board called the Board of Trustees. And Miss Helen Samuel was the first secretary of that Board of Trustees, and she went on to become president of that Board of Trustees. And in 1974, she wrote a little history of the Arlington Hospital, and she said this: during the early years, the Women's Auxiliary, founded in 1934 and led by Mrs. Lily K. Boss, raised a considerable portion of the money for the ground purchase for the future hospital. The first constitution of this brand new auxiliary stated that its purpose was to assist the Board of Trustees in furthering the interests of the hospital and the welfare of its patients by undertaking such work as the auxiliary may select and which shall be approved by the Board of Trustees. Well, our Constitution today reads very much that same way. And surely one of the reasons for our being as an auxiliary is to support the hospital staff with services. And today we do such things as escort patients on their admission and on their discharge into the hospital. We have family liaison rooms outside the emergency room and outside the OR. We man those places. We work at the information desk. We help in the clinic, in the outpatient OR, and the medical staff library. We water the patient flowers, we deliver newspapers, we help in the blood bank, and we supervise the junior auxiliary, which is made up of teenagers. We also have an active lifeline committee, and this is the alert system for the homebound, and we go out and install the lifeline instruments, and one is on display at our table in the room right outside the auditorium. We also have a Buckle Up Baby program. We loan out seats at a minimal cost for the new babies. When they bring back the seat after 6 months, they can get a large one if they want, but we have the larger seats, which we call the grandparent special. If you have a child coming into town and want to borrow a seat just for a brief period of time, you can rent one of those for a month, and we have those on display too. And Thursday of this week was the actual birthday of the hospital. So OB kept an eye out and found that we had 3 babies born. And to these 3 babies, the auxiliary has loaned out the baby car seat free, and when it comes back, the hospital is going to give the baby at 6 months the larger car seat, just for saying thanks for being born on the actual birth date. A committee once very active in the auxiliary was the sewing group. In 1947, these ladies began meeting in members' homes. Later, the administrator, Mr. Anderson, designated a room in the hospital for these ladies to meet. They made the drapes, they made the bedspreads, they made covers for the OR, and they mended all these things as mending became necessary. In 1961, Mr. Anderson is quoted as having said, "The sewing ladies have saved this hospital at least $60,000. That's a lot of money then, and more then than now, but a lot of money. Another reason for our being is to support this hospital with funds. In the 30s and 40s, the auxiliary was having lawn festivals, oyster suppers, and benefit matinees at the Wilson Theater. Today we have bake sales, auction, fashion shows, and boutiques. And our biggest money raiser is the gift shop. And this too is having an anniversary. They're 30 years old this week. And tomorrow there'll be a 30% off sale if you want to come back and partake in that. That's a big savings, 30% off on all gift items, I should stress. We also run a thrift shop down in the Clarendon area. And this is something you might want to keep in mind as you do your spring cleaning of your closets. We would welcome any contributions. 40 years ago, the auxiliary was buying 150 table services of cutlery, fans for the kitchen, furniture for the nurses' quarters. Today, in 1983, we spent about $68,000 on such things as a 3-channel EKG, a flash steam sterilizer, 2 dialysis machines, 6 stretchers for the ER, and so on. 50 years ago, 142 charter members launched the auxiliary. It was women only then. Now, we've grown over the years, and the word women has been dropped from our title. And we have men and women now working all throughout the hospital and at our special money-raising events. Some of our auxiliary members are giving tours. You might want to take a tour after this program if you haven't already done so. And we'd be happy to interest any of you today in the auxiliary if you'd like to join. There's material about that on our table in the other room. I'd like to recognize some of these ladies today. We have a number in the audience. If you're an auxiliary member, you just want to raise your hand and let them know you're here. Auxiliary members. We wear pink smocks when we're on duty. And there's some here today that were in that famous sewing group. I'd like to pay special recognition to them. If the sewing group ladies that are here today could raise your hand. I see 2 or 3 of you back there. Okay, and just one final acknowledgement. We have a number of past presidents in the audience, or I can see 2 or 3 anyway. Could they just come forward, please, or stand up, or you're already standing there. Florence, she was president for 2 years, and Kay Nacetta, she was the past president for 2 years. Down in front, we have Gladys Stevens, who was 2 years back in the 60s, and Martha Rao, I think, was 3 years back in the 60s. And thank you very much. Martha Rao was not only a past president, but she was very active in the auxiliary before there was a hospital. She was at the very first money-raising event, I understand, put on by the auxiliary, which was a lawn festival. And she tells me that Mr. Anderson once accused her of spending more time in the hospital than he did. And we've invited her to come today to share a few of her reminiscences, her memories of these early days. And so we're just real happy to have you, Martha. Want to come up at this time? I'll say thank you with this first.
I was asked to give just a short resume of the very early beginnings of the auxiliary. In the 1930s, people of Arlington County didn't think we needed a hospital because the facilities in the district were handy. You just had to go over the bridge and you could get it. But Mrs. May Jacobs, who was then superintendent of the public welfare, was the first person to publicly say, we need a hospital in Arlington County. And she later was joined by Mr. Boss, Mrs. Boss, Mr. Hall, and Mrs. Kelly, and the women's clubs of Arlington County. And they organized and spread the word that Arlington really did need a hospital. So their efforts were fulfilled when the state issued a charter in 1934. And it was recorded in the court records. So then, of course, they had to find and see that they could build a hospital. And the first two requests were refused, but the third request was granted, of course, with a lot of restrictions because it was during war times. And the hospital had the charter, the permit. Now they had to find a place to put it. There were a lot of sites offered in those days, but none of them were desirable until Mr. Seelock offered his farm. And when Mr. Hall heard about it, he immediately investigated, and in about 2 or 3 days, 2 carloads of interested people went out to look at this lot. And Mr. Hall and Mrs. Boss and Mrs. Kelly and a doctor were in the first car, and May and Emma Jacobs and Nanny Foster and Elsie Fitz, Mercedes Reed, and myself were in the second car. When we drove up and saw this beautiful expanse of land in the very middle of Arlington County, with roads on 3 sides and Lee Highway just a few blocks away, we knew that's where the hospital should be built. The board bought the hospital lot for $15,000, $3,000 down, and $1,000 worth of hospitalization for the Seelock family. Well, now the auxiliary really had something to work for. They just had all kinds of money making events, and all the money was spent on the purchase price of the lot. And in 6 years, the lot was clear. Then, of course, they had to raise money to build a hospital. So they hired a firm from New York, and to have a drive of $170,000. There were 2 teams. There was the men's team was headed by Dr. Noland, and the second team I was chairman of. And of course our names were up in lights in the center of Clarendon and little thermometers on each post, and we watched the daily contributions coming in. And my committees worked very hard, but they'd come back and they'd say, Martha, the people of Arlington County are not ready for a hospital. The results are very, very slim. And their fears were, of course, verified when in that drive only $33,000 were raised. That's a long way from $176,000. So until the expenses were paid and the cash donations given back, we had very little from that particular drive. And it was that time that the board decided that from then on they would take charge of the drives, which they did, were always successful, and of course this building shows that they were. So then they had a drive, and the hospital was planned and built and opened, of course, in the early 1944. And then, of course, is when the auxiliary really started to work, because they had a place now. They were seen in all sections of the hospital doing their work and helping wherever they can. And I can still see these sewing ladies going home with big bags of linens to be mended and toting them back the next week and going back until, of course, a little room was allotted to them in the hospital with their machines. And their sewing just extended to anything that was needed, that could be sewn. So then in 1953, Elsie Fitz asked Mr. Anderson if by any chance a corner of the reception room could be made into a gift shop. She says all it needed was a wall and some windows and a counter and a few shelves and a door that had a lock on it. So her request was granted, and the little shop was built, and from that little shop, why, thousands and thousands of dollars have gone into the building fund and for equipment, and all through the years, and still is, because the shop here is still doing the same thing, just providing the necessary things for the hospital. So I think that the auxiliary is to be congratulated on the very great success that they have experienced, and they'll keep on, and I know they'll grow. They have, understand, 500 members now. We were glad to have 50 in those days, and so that all I can say is I congratulate them, and I hope that they'll continue to work for the hospital as they have, and may God further every endeavor that they undertake. Thank you.
I mentioned earlier that our auxiliary started out small, but we grew and we grew, and when we first began thinking about our 50th anniversary, we thought, ooh, do you realize we're almost at our 500th member? And wouldn't it be great if before this program today we could welcome our 500th member? We sort of go up and down, people move away or they lose interest, and I'm sorry that some people do. We take them off the roster, but it's a gradual climb upward. And we were just so happy one afternoon when Mary Brown walked in the door and said, I'd like to join the auxiliary. And we said, fine, Mary, you're number 500. And she is here with us today, and I'd like her to come forward. Let me tell you first, though, she came to this country from England as a nanny, and I think this is very interesting. Came over with a family that was connected with the embassy, and she liked it so well she stayed on in this country. And she is a registered nurse. She's been affiliated with Fairfax Hospital, and for 23 years was their patient care coordinator in their OB section there. So she comes well qualified, better qualified than most of us, but we're just so happy she's a member of our auxiliary now. She's training in the outpatient surgery area and also in the surgery liaison room. So she's training in 2 areas, and we just hope she'll be with us for a long, long time. Mary? And I want to give Mary her membership card so she's officially one of us.
Thank you very much, Anne. I feel very honored to be a member of the auxiliary of this fine institution. I guess I just can't stay away from hospitals.
We're glad you came. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ann. Where are we? Okay, special presentations. It's always nice to be able to present presentos to those who need presents. And in our presence today, we have a few presentations to make to these good people who are present here. After you've served a long time on the Board of Trustees here at no pay, at long hours, when it's all over with and you cease being on the Board of Trustees, they give you a handshake and a plaque on the wall. For the purpose of receiving their plaques today for those who have recently ceased being board members, we have the presentation. Kirby Payne. He just was one step ahead of me. Next year, I'll get one of those. Is Dr. McGavin with us today? Couldn't make it. Got patience. All righty. Anthony Siciliano. Mr. Siciliano, I know I saw you here. There he is. There's a warm handshake and there's a plaque. Lillian Brown. Lillian.
Yes, I do. Thank you so very much. I would like to take this opportunity to say thanks to Arlington. And Henry, I've known you a long time. I certainly have enjoyed serving on the board. You have mentioned the history of the hospital, and I'd like to go back a little further, if I may, and let you know that this land that you're standing on today used to be where we used to play baseball. All right? And I would like for you to meet some of the people who played that baseball, and we did a little bit of everything. If you from Halls Hill would stand up, the history of it, there's part of you there and part of you there. And we have indeed come a long way, and I too am proud. Henry spoke about 30 years ago when he first had his first operation. I would like to thank God today because this is my first day out of Arlington Hospital, and the sun is shining and everything is beautiful. Thank you.
You see how important this hospital is. We all have to come here. There's one guy who did an awful lot for this hospital, and one day came and he quit being on the board. Well, that's because he reorganized the whole kit and caboodle, and he became the president of the Arlington Hospital Foundation, which is the parent company for this. It gives me great pleasure to introduce and to present him with the plaque he never got yet either for serving on the hospital board, my boss, Dr. Kenneth Haggerty. Thanks very much, Henry. Was afraid maybe he brought a baseball team too. Next, Mr. Harry Esmacher. Harry, I saw you. There you are. And Dr. John Mandanis. John? You've heard from the administration, you've heard from trustees, you've heard from friends and neighbors. It's now time to talk about the other arm of this whole thing, the doctors. It was a great pleasure today that we have with us one of the first surgeons ever to operate here at Arlington Hospital 40 years ago. The gentleman is a great guy, is a great doctor. He still has a great interest in this hospital. And after a great effort by a whole bunch of people a couple of years ago, we named this auditorium building after him. It is my great pleasure to now introduce Dr. John Hazel. Good to see you, my friend.
Well, I'm not going to talk about medicine. I'm going to talk about what some others have already talked about, some of the history of this hospital. It goes something like this. The ground was broken for the hospital in April of 1943 and opened 11 months later in 1944. I think it was March, and the day it opened, I had the dubious honor of operating that day. Things have changed a lot since that time. Someone said they played baseball here on this ground. Well, I used to come out 16th Street. I started to practice here in 1929, and I used to see cows in the field here, very peaceful. In those days, we were without a hospital. As I say, I started in 29, and sick patients had to go to Georgetown. In those days, there were no ambulances, no rescue squads, but there were a half a dozen dedicated doctors. I well remember Dr. Walton, from whose daughter this lectern was donated to the hospital. This is Dr. James Howard Walton, and he was a fine man. Then right along with him was a Dr. Welburn, whose office was where the Parkington Shopping Center is now. Then Dr. Sutton, Dr. Quick, and I have to smile when I say Dr. Quick because sometime later I went to see a patient, and I was a young fellow then, and I used to be used to riding ambulances and whatnot, and I must have gotten there in a hurry because she said, "My, are you here already?" I said, "You know, the last time we asked a doctor to see us, it was a Dr. Quick, and he hasn't gotten here yet." Then I think there were about 6 doctors forming the Arlington County Medical Society, and we used to meet on the 2nd floor of the American Drug Store in Clarendon. And among other things we talked about was the possibility of getting a hospital here. And they were really very anxious to get a hospital. I remember the days we would try to figure out how we could get a hospital. Well, that was in the 1930s, and I'd always wanted to study surgery. At that time, there were no hospitals in Washington except Columbia Hospital, who took second-year interns or residents, and I didn't care to go into that line. So I found that I could go into the public health service, and I became an assistant surgeon. I was stationed in Boston, Massachusetts for 5 years, and I picked up a lot of surgery. I took a year off from the Marine Hospital and attended the University of Pennsylvania for a year, then went back and served another year in the Marine Hospital, the Public Health Service, and I got a master's degree in surgery in 1935, and I came back to Arlington and opened an office and practiced here until 1944. And during that time is when Arlington Hospital opened. At that time, I had a chance. I thought I'd finished my surgical training, but I got a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in surgery, so I went out there for 3 years. And I came back here, built a home and office at the corner of Wilson Boulevard and Kenmore Street, and it was quite a busy place. Since there was no hospital here, no ambulances, no rescue squads, the police cars used to pull up to my office. tell me they had a sick patient, a very sick patient, or an injury, and I would go out and look at them. And if I could handle it in my office, which was pretty well equipped for a country hospital in those, a country office in those days, I'd take care of them there. If not, I said, well, take them on to Georgetown, which was then at 35th and O Street in Georgetown. And I'd follow the ambulance. So then I heard Ms. Jacobs' name mentioned here. Ms. Jacobs was the welfare department in those days. I don't think I ever saw any other employees. She was the one, and she was a wonderful woman. And one day she called me and said, I've got a very sick lady down at Colonial Heights. That's the hill at the top of Roslyn, and I guess where Colonial Village Apartments got its name. She said, would you come and see her? She's a very poor lady, and she needs hospitalization, I think. So I went down and I found that she had pneumonia. And there were 3 little children playing on the floor. And here was this very sick, aged woman. And I checked her chest. She had pneumonia, no penicillin in those days. You had to give her the best nursing care you could. And in 8 or 9 days, they had what's called a crisis. The fever would drop, and they would recover if they lasted that long. Well, Ms. Jacobs had a big old Buick automobile, and Ms. Jacobs and I carried her out and laid her on the back seat. I think the back seat must have been 6 feet wide, so we set off for Arlington, for Georgetown. And she was put to bed, and I followed her through. And the day she left, I went, I'd seen her every day. During that time, the day she left, I happened to be in there, and the good sister said, you know, that poor lady that you sent in here a week ago had some $20 bills pinned in her underwear, and we were afraid that she might lose it. So I took it and I kept it, and this morning when I learned she was going home, I went to see her, and she said to me, you know, I had some money that I was going to pay the hospital bill with, but she says I must have lost it. And the sister said, no, you never lost it. I found it, and here it is. And she says, well, I want you to take that toward the hospital bill. She said, there is no hospital bill. I thought that was a pretty nice thing. And Ms. Jacobs really was a very fine woman and did a lot in the early days of this county medical service. Well, let me see what else happened. That was in 1930s. And that fall, I'd always wanted to go to the Mayo Clinic. And although I'd had quite a bit of surgical training, I got an appointment as a resident in surgery, and I went out to Mayo's for 3 years. And I found my way back to Arlington, and I was there ever since. Had my office at Wilson Boulevard and Kenmore Street. And I remember in those days, well, really before that, the first period I was here, there weren't as many telephones in Arlington as now. And oftentimes in the middle of the night, why, the relatives of sick patients would throw pebbles up on my bedroom window. They knew where I lived. And in a few minutes, I'd be on my way. So those are some of the things that we dealt with. Then across the street from us, there was a big old house used as a boarding house for teachers. And one of the teachers had a 10-year-old boy that was very ill one Sunday morning. And she asked me to come over and see the child. I went over. I had never seen a case of polio before, but it looked to me like polio. But I knew that if I diagnosed as polio and then someone else came along and said, this is not polio, this is a whooping cough or something, that I might as well pull out. So I called my friend, Dr. Wallace Yater, who was professor of medicine at Georgetown, whom I'd known for many years, to come out and see what he thought about it. And he said, I think we'll have to tell the family it's polio. So now the child was getting rather dusky. He said, now the only thing that'll help him is the iron lung. And believe it or not, at that time, that was the only iron lung in the city of Washington. And that was at the old Gallinger Hospital, which is now GC General. He said, and you've got to get there in a hurry with him. Well, I either called Richmond or the health department. I think in those days you were supposed to get a permit if you moved a contagious case of that kind out of the state. And and the man that answered the phone down there said, put some sheets all over the inside of your automobile and do something, and says, then throw the sheets away afterwards. Well, I thought, I don't have time to pin sheets, let's go. So 11 o'clock, this is a pretty good story. 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, I set out for Gallagher Hospital, which I'll tell you in a minute where it is. So I went down Wilson Boulevard at about 45, 50 miles an hour, thinking surely I'd pick up a policeman. I'd blow my horn, and when I went by the jail and the courthouse, I blew it loud and went faster. No police. Through Roslyn, across Key Bridge, down M Street, out Pennsylvania Avenue, and there was nothing, no traffic in front of the White House then. And I just, for the devil of it, went 65 miles an hour blowing my horn, no police. Across 15th Street, New York Avenue to Massachusetts Avenue to Southeast, about 3 blocks from the hospital. I'd been there before when I was a student, and a policeman rode up and said, "What's the rush?" I said, "Well, I'm happy to see one policeman at last." I said, "It's a pleasure to meet you." He said, "Well, what's the matter? Well, what were you speeding for?" I said, "Look in the back seat." I said, "I want to go to Gallagher Hospital. Follow me." And we got him there in time, and he lived a long time. And that was, of course, I would have better sense, I guess, than to ride that fast again. But that was the story. So it happened that I've heard the lady talk about the meetings of the auxiliary, and all the women really contributed to this hospital. And so did the 6 doctors who then composed the entire number of doctors in Arlington County. I think there are now 500 or 600, but that was a different day. So then, after being here a number of years, in 1966, I moved up to Warrenton, thought I'd retire, but I ended up there building a small medical building because the doctors were scarce there, and I found myself working for another 10 years. But I used to bring my serious cases down to Arlington, and I've been down here nearly every Friday since that day to attend their meetings. We used to meet before we had this auditorium in the cafeteria by pulling a sliding door, and you could hardly hear the speaker because the dishwashing machine made a lot of noise. So then I'll tell you a little funny story about this building. I guess this building was opened in '82, I believe, and about a year before that, my 2 sons came to visit us, I think before breakfast, 8 o'clock in the morning or something, and they were talking to Ms. Hazel and so forth and so on, and I wondered what they were talking about. So after they had gone, she said, "Well, I didn't tell you anything while they were here, but they were afraid that if they raised some money to build a conference center in appreciation for all the work you'd done, that you might think that your days were numbered." I said, "I don't care. If it's a good hospital and help the hospital, I'll have more days." So now there's one other thing, or 2 things that happened. I heard one of the ladies talk about paying the bills here. I had a brother-in-law, who's since deceased, who was the director of the Arlington Trust Company, and the financial position of this hospital in those days was very precarious. And he guaranteed the bread and milk bill, which I heard from a lady today, he guaranteed it for 6 or 7